look at this. Now we have a serious clerk case. Now I have, darn it, I thought I'd be able to not behave tonight in church. I'm so kidding. How are you? I'll be moving in the middle of July. Yeah, I finished it from the end of June. Yeah. Let's dress well. I'm so glad. I heard so many, all kinds of limiting on the guy's stuff. Thank you. I never see it so long. Nice to step out. Nice to see you. Well, that gives you some good credit. We call that gifts. Gifts is like a license. It's how you get somewhere. Who do you know? What's your gift? You tend not to publicize that.
I know some.
You can take my spot and be the cut. Tony, yeah, I was telling him no, whereas.
Let's see here. Well, we will hope that, I mean, if anybody's still coming in, I guess, how many of y'all were surprised like I was that you cannot come up the driveway? Anybody surprised at that? I didn't know it had happened yet. I thought it was going to be after tonight, but no driveway now. So we'll learn we come and go through the building. All right. Well, I'm glad that you all are all here. It was 21 years ago that this friend of mine right here named Mark Cohn was called to serve as the rabbi at Temple Emmanuel here in Winston-Salem. But it was only 3 years ago that I visited a Friday night worship service at the temple and met this outstanding man that night. So ever since, I've tried to find ways for us to do interfaith activities and work together so that we can have more Moravians meeting Jewish friends at the temple and so forth. But unfortunately, we've had this COVID deal that slowed down a lot of things I would have loved to have done by now. But during the time that Mark and I have known each other, we've stayed in touch. And so it makes me a little sad to tell you that this rabbi is leaving Winston-Salem pretty soon, like in June. And he's moving like way up north. We're talking Massachusetts. That's way up north to me. So we've invited him to be with us tonight to share some of the highlights of his 21 years here in the temple, serving in the temple, and also being active in our community, which is something that he's done. So before letting him come up here and speak at the mic, I do have a few more things to tell you that I've learned about this faithful servant. His college days were spent at UCLA. He grew up in California, so went to college, UCLA. And his grad school days, interestingly enough, were at Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Well, so I'm thinking between his time at Bethlehem and all these years here in Winston-Salem, I'll bet you Mark knows a thing or two about us Moravians by now. Originally, his study focus was history. That was the path that he was pursuing. But then he felt called to ministry, and so after his degree at Lehigh, then he spent another 4 years in preparing, and part of that time was in Jerusalem, preparing to be a rabbi, and was ordained in 1998. Some years ago, an ongoing interfaith opportunity that Mark helped create here in Winston-Salem caused the Winston-Salem Foundation to recognize him with an ECHO Award for building community here. And then, not long ago, I learned that a newspaper in New York called the Jewish Daily Forward put our guest on their list of the 33 most inspiring rabbis in America. And so he has, he is special. He does God's work. More than once, he and Temple Emmanuel have welcomed Winston-Salem citizens to the temple after, from time to time, we have these tragic anti-Semitic events that occur around our country. And more than once, they have welcomed people to come to the temple, offering an opportunity to lament together and to affirm our shared faith in God. So I'd like for us, I've told him he can't talk the whole time because I want us to have time for questions. So we're going to save the last 10, 15 minutes, whatever like that, for questions. So you be thinking along the way. And first, before Mark comes forward, I'm going to turn the mic over to my friend, Ronna Klein. Ronna has been here with us several times over these last few years that we've made friends for interfaith gatherings. She is a very active member at Temple Emmanuel, and but I like to think she's also part Moravian because she works at Salem Town in the Babcock Healthcare Center. Rana is the memory care program manager, and everyone there loves her. I just hear this all the time when I'm at Salem Town, how much they love her being there. So that's why I say you must be part Moravian, and that's fine with you. Rana also serves as the North Carolina State Chair for the Alzheimer's and once a year fundraiser they have called The Longest Day. She has that responsibility. So I'm going to ask Rana to speak briefly at the beginning here now to tell us what is it like to have Mark Cohn as your rabbi. What is that like? And, and yeah, and she's going to say good things. And then we'll give this special rabbi his time to share about looking back over his 21 years. And so save your questions until the end. Okay? All right, Ms. Rana.
Hello, everyone. I just want to say I've been here in Winston-Salem 25 years, and I do know a lot about the Moravian Church now, working at Salem Town for almost 10 years. But I learned more about being Jewish since I've moved to Winston-Salem than I did all my years up north in Pittsburgh and in Syracuse. Because it's very interesting when you come to North Carolina and you're Jewish, you don't know as much about being Jewish as you think you do when someone asks you about your faith. And there are people that know a lot more about the Bible and can quote the Bible. So I started studying with Rabbi Mark, and he is the best teacher that I've had. So I went to Hebrew school. I went to Sunday school 3 days a week growing up. I went for 6 years. In college, I studied Hebrew again, and I took more courses. I took adult education. But I gotta tell you, I learned a lot from Rabbi Mark. And so for me, I'm gonna miss that educational part, but I'm gonna take away, I have all my papers. Like, he gives out papers when we study. I have all my papers. I have a folder full of wonderful things. And the more in depth he went, and the more crazy it got deep down inside, the more I loved it, because I was learning so much from him. So I'm excited that he's going on to a new chapter. I'm gonna miss our educational stuff, but I'm hoping that someday I'll find you somewhere on a computer world somewhere, and I'll be able to study with him again. He's a great teacher. He's a great person to have here in Winston-Salem. We do wonderful interfaith things, as you can tell. And it's just wonderful to be a part of his congregation. And I love the Moravian Church because I'm at Salem Town, so there I go. And I had to learn lots of stuff. And there's lots of similarities, which I'm sure you'll talk about, the lovely similarities between the two. So please enjoy hearing about his wonderful time here in Winston-Salem. That's all yours, Mark.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you, Rana. And they rhyme. Yes, if there's anybody else who has a name that ends in na, then let me just thank you while I'm at it. That is really lovely what you both said, and I'm really wondering who you're talking about. And I'm like, boy, that sounds like a nice person. I go, can't wait to hear from this guy. And, oh gosh, that's me? As we say, oi. So let's just sing for a minute. You didn't know you were coming to choir practice. And our friends who are watching online, I don't know where the cameras are. I see a camera there. For friends who are online, just consider yourself in the pews here. This is a song without words. It's just called a nigun. It goes like this. I la 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 ya da da ya la 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 ya da da ya la 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 ya da da The second part goes, ay, ay, ya, la, na, 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 ya, da, da, ay, ay, ya, da, na, 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 ya, da, da, da. It goes down like that. And then so it goes, ay, da, ya, ay, ay, ya, na, 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 ya, da, da, ay, ay, ya, na, 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 ya, da, da, ay. Back to the beginning. Ay, ay, ya, la, 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 ya, la, la, ay, 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 na, 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 ya, la, la. This is all I have planned for the entire hour. It's really very special to be in this church on this night, and with my colleague Rick and a new colleague Andrew. We don't know each other as well, but we clearly share the same spirit of desire of building community in sacred space. And because, first of all, it's special to just be with colleagues, period. And someone I've worked with over the years and admired. And I can remember, I believe we had a Thanksgiving service here one year, and that may be the last time I was in here, actually, which is already several years ago. So I've been in here since, but I have to say, coming into Old Salem is just special for me. I knew this the minute I arrived in Winston-Salem. I was going on a tour, and we came, and I happen to love history, and I got my master's degree at Lehigh University. And when I knew nothing about Winston-Salem before I moved here. And someone actually had to point out, well, it's like the cigarettes. I'm like, oh, right, of course. And when I started to learn about the Moravians, I'm like, wait a second. There's like only one other city in the entire country where the Moravians are known, and it's Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And now my daughter is a sophomore at Muhlenberg College in Allentown, so she's literally right down the road. I was just visiting her the other day. So I don't know, somehow life takes me back to the Lehigh Valley, or some connection with it, therefore. And when I came into Salem, I could just tell that the whole energy is just different here as soon as you enter into these streets back here. And I have loved this area. And literally, I was on the phone with my wife as I was driving in. I'm like, why do I not come here more often? I mean, like, every time I come over to Old Salem, I'm so happy. And so it's very special to be here. It's special to be at home Moravian. And I am very honored by the words that you said. And I wanted to start with a nigun, as we call it, a melody, a wordless melody, because it's nice just to sing for a second. And somehow music tends to transcend language and all sorts of other things for us. The concept of singing a nigun, this is a wordless song, is from various parts in the Jewish world and Jewish time. But it really grows in its importance with the growth of what's called Chassidut, or Hasidic Jewry, which comes out of Ukraine, Western Ukraine, in the 18th century, kind of the mid-1700s. There's one person in particular. He's known as the Baal Shem Tov, the master of a good name. His real name was Eliezer ben Yisrael. And he and others who followed believe that where in Jewish life we tend to get very intense and focused on digging into those various holes and taking deep, intensive thought to law and the nature of. So what does it mean when it's Passover? My son sends me a question. Thank God he would even ask me this question. He says, Dad, is this bowl kosher for Passover? What's with the bowl? The bowl is made from wheat product. So that's already fascinating that you can make a bowl out of a grain, right? So already that's interesting. But the grain, there are 5 grains we're supposed to stay away from during Passover. Wheat is one of them, unless it's the wheat that was harvested specifically for making matzah meal or matzah in particular, which we are allowed to eat because of how it's actually cooked. So, first of all, thank God I have a child who's actually interested and would want to ask that kind of question. But that deep dive into, by the way, the answer is no, unless. The answer is no, because you're not supposed to derive benefit from wheat that's not kosher for Passover during the week itself. And so technically you should not use that bowl. And my son, God bless him, he follows up with the question, he says, but there is even a small chance that even if it was a minuscule amount of the wheat, of the bowl could somehow slough off and get into your food, now you've just de-koshered, you've made the food not kosher for Passover. Of course, the rabbis have an answer for that, which is if it's less than 1/60th of the overall total of what you're consuming, you're fine. And if you did it, you only found out about it after the fact, then okay. But if you intentionally went and you ate from the wheat bowl and you were eating that, now you're in trouble always around, right? I'm not supposed to eat bacon. So I can't go out and eat a bacon double cheese. You shouldn't eat a bacon double cheeseburger for all kinds of reasons, but if after the fact you eat something, you find out that you're living in the South and the green beans were cooked in fatback, but you didn't realize it ahead of time, you haven't done anything wrong. If you knew about it ahead of time, that it was cooked in the fatback, okay, now you're in trouble. You with me so far? Welcome to the Jewish mind. Right? So Chassidut grows out of this sense of, yes, of course we need to adhere to law and be well versed in it and interpretations of the text and all of that. But if you miss out on God and clinging to God and spiritual uplift, you kind of miss the point. And so that's where Chassidut grows out of, and it's largely in Western Ukraine, which is, of course, very timely, given our world right now. And I can't gather in settings right now without us taking a moment to think about the 5 million refugees who have left the country. Forget the roughly 10 million who were displaced in their own country, and the death and the massive destruction that goes on. And to me, it feels so strange to be driving along Stratford Avenue Road and know that, yes, a world away is a horror that sadly we as Jews in particular know from totalitarian destruction and awful in that area. Ukraine, of the 6 million Jews who died in the Holocaust, 1 million of them were from Ukraine. And Ukraine is seeded with a lot of anti-Semitism, and the Nazis were able to be so successful because of the number of sympathizers in that area. And that goes back to, it's a very long history. So we often sing a nigun at Temple just to kind of bring everybody together, but they have a different feel these days. When you think about this tradition and where it comes from and why we do it, and we remember our connection and for many of us, actual family from that area. Parts of my roots are not far from there at all. Moldova, Romania, part of Poland. So that's part of what's on my mind. And so a song is lovely to sing, and you can even hear how the lift in it is partly because we're in this holiday right now. We're in this month. In Hebrew, it's called Nisan, which is about Passover. And there's a lot. And I have something I want to teach tonight, but I also want to address your question of what have I learned over 21 years. Now, the truth of the matter is my memory is very poor. I can remember some things, and some things very well, some things I don't want to remember, but to say, what have I learned? Gosh, I've been asked that. I feel like one of our people at the temple, Cynthia Silver, who's a dear friend of Rana's and mine, and she works in our front office, and she, when this year started, she says, I think we need to create a Rabbi Mark's last tour in Winston-Salem and list the places like, whatever it would be, and Home Moravian would have to be one of those, now showing on April 20th at Home Moravian. I think among the things that I've learned is the centrality of community and how important community is. And that's not unique to this area, it's not unique to this time, but in a world that is increasingly becoming, it's already well divided, but what we lack is community and trying to create real community with one another. And the dissolution of a lot of religious places, whether it's in various Protestant churches or in synagogues, losing connection to community is really tough. That being said, the flip side, what Rana pointed out, what is always amazing when Jews live in a big city, it's very easy to be Jewish kind of almost by osmosis at times, particularly if you're in a very large city, Los Angeles, Miami, New York. But when you come to Winston-Salem, in order to make the Jewish community happen, you have to be a part of it. We really rely on that. And when I came here, it was in part because I wanted to be somewhere where potentially there was only one synagogue, and that is the story. And if there's only one synagogue and there's only one rabbi, then that rabbi is going to be the rabbi for that community, for that synagogue, but also for the community, and be a bit of a spokesperson for the community. And that was very appealing to me. And I have done that in spades. When I went into the rabbinate, I was sitting in my graduate school dorm room in Lehigh University, and I was working on my master's in history, and I wanted to teach. And someone said, "Oh, you really need to go to get a PhD in history." And I'm like, I don't know that I really want a 5-year program. That's an awful lot. And what do I really want to do with myself? And I was a whopping 23 years old. And I said, well, I know I love to study, and I really want to teach, and I want to work deeply in the Jewish community. I'd grown up very active in my synagogue and my Jewish community. My family was very involved. I said, I really want to work with people, though, of all ages and kind of stages of their lives. And I looked at the list, and I'm like, that sounds like what a rabbi does. And I called my rabbi, who was still my rabbi. Thank God he's just turned 86. And he said, I knew you'd make that decision, I just didn't want to tell you. So I finished my master's degree and then went on to rabbinical school, which of course is 5 years. So there was. And so I think what I've learned is the value of community and the importance of it, both for us within the community, in the Jewish world, and recognizing that we as Jews are not just a religion, that Judaism is the spiritual expression of our people, that we're a people first and foremost. And I come from the Reform tradition of Jewish life. Up until about the 1800s, you're either or Ukraine or Italy, and so there are regional differences into how we express our Judaism, that spiritual expression, and an approach to law, for example. But you're just a Jew, and you hold the commandments, the 613 commandments of Torah, as obligatory. That's just what you do. And in the 1800s, in Western Europe and in North America, the whole concept and being influenced by the Enlightenment, and we're becoming accepted as citizens, that's a new thing. So I would never consider myself Polish or Romanian, despite the fact that's where my family comes from. We were Jews living in Poland. We were Jews living in Romania. We weren't allowed to be. We were not of that citizenry. And what happens in Western Europe and in North America, there's a huge shift. And Judaism becomes, for those in what comes to be known as non-Orthodox Judaism, or the liberal sides of Judaism, that's not a political statement, it's a nature of how we approach the text and tradition, that's Reform, conservative. Judaism becomes much more of a religion, and the peoplehood aspect begins to fade, which is a very dangerous thing for the Jewish people. And so, so part of what I've learned is the importance of holding on to peoplehood and stressing that the religious expression, that's how we live our Judaism. And so working with my community on that, and what does that mean? Reform did away with a lot of traditional practices. And indeed, some of them were like, really, you're gonna worry about a wheat bowl? I mean, like, really? That's what you're gonna worry about? Among the Ashkenazi Jews, which are the Jews who come from Central and Eastern Europe, like my family, you wouldn't eat any, not just the 5 grains you're supposed to stay away from, barley, rye, oats, wheat, and spelt, but you might have a bag of corn, and the corn might have been exposed to a leavening agent, corn, which means jam that has corn syrup, can't have it for Passover. And it becomes so much attention to this kind of detail that a lot of people are like, well, that's crazy. That's too much of that. So Reform did away with some of those traditions. I'm of a body of thought in Reform that says, hold on a second. We need to, Reform is about informed choice. We need to know what we're doing, what we're not doing, but why we're not doing what we're doing and why we are doing what we are doing. And so my wife, who I just married a few months ago, she's a rabbi in Springfield, Massachusetts. That's why I'm moving up there. We had a lot to think about, like, so, okay, who blinks first, right? like we both have very good jobs and we both are deeply committed in those areas. We had a lot to think about, like, so what's next for both of us individually and for the family we're creating? And she has 3 kids, I have 2, and they're all kind of between 19 and 27 right now in their lives. A lot to think about. And obviously, ultimately, the decision was I'm moving up to Springfield. She comes from the conservative movement of Judaism. She started in rabbinical school in 1984, and she was in the first class that allowed women in the rabbinical school. The Reform movement started with women, and the first ordained woman in the Reform movement was 1972. She's in the first group that enters in 1984. But so her practice, so when I was observing Passover with her this past week when I was up there, she keeps a much stricter level of kashrut, of kosher, than I do. And so it's a learning curve for me. I happen to like that. But there would be others in the Jewish world who would say, are you kidding? She's not doing it right at all. She's way too flexible in certain things. And so there's all of that that's kind of happening. So for me, it's been about how do we have our meaningful religious expression? How do we feel connected as a people? And so in what's happening in Ukraine right now, I'm a deep believer in supporting those and folks there as best we can. But for us as Jews, we're specifically targeting a lot of our money towards Jewish organizations who support Ukrainian Jews, and those organizations support non-Jews as well. It's not like, oh, I'm sorry, you're not Jewish? No, we're not going to help you. But it really makes sure that they're helping that. Other things that I've learned is that relationships, and this may sound kind of obvious, but relationships really matter, and paying attention to people really is important. And one of the taglines we have about Temple Emmanuel is that we try to make Judaism meaningful and relevant. Meaningful and relevant. And that is always, like, we come back if we're designing a program, or if I'm leading a service, whatever it is this meaningful? Is this relevant to what's happening right now? And I'm sure there are times that we hit it better than other times. That's just the reality of it. Okay, how am I doing? Is this covering like about what you want to hear? Is this of interest? We're doing all right? All right, let me just put my watch off. As somebody once told me, when you take your watch off to see it, it means nothing other than you took your watch off. So let me do a little teaching for a second to give you a few minutes. To give you, it's so wonderful having this beautiful Bible in front of me. As I said, it's like, oh, this is one of our books. That's great. We're open to Isaiah. Like, I know this part. It's so wonderful. I'm very distracted by reading. So when we think about the High Holy Days, and we use that term, the High Holy Days, what do you think? What does that conjure up? What days does that conjure up? What is it? You can be wrong. It's okay to be wrong. I will be more than happy. For the Jews, So thank you for saying Passover. That's great. It's not what I'm thinking of, but it's great that you said that. I appreciate that. When we think about the High Holy Days, what are we thinking of? Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Those are the High Holy Days. A very intense. Don't worry, I got you. Hold on. When you think about the High Holy Days, Rosh Hashanah is the Jewish New Year. And the Day of Repentance is Yom Kippur. They're in the fall, very, very important. Now here, let me just show you again, the Jewish mind, we have all kinds of issues back from Torah. Rosh Hashanah falls on the first day of the 7th month. So what happened to, I thought it was the New Year? Why would you start a new year on the 7th month? Because that's what it says in Torah. Open up in Leviticus chapter 29. It's 20-something. We don't have, chapters and verses was a Christian creation. Great job with that. I mean, really fabulous suggestion. We just know how to roll through the Torah. It's in Parashat Emor. It's like Leviticus 23. Okay. So it's the first day of the 7th month. You shall proclaim a day of solemnity and celebration with the blast of the shofar, the ram's horn. Doesn't call it a new year at that time. It's the first day of the 7th month. Now, what we're marking is creation. We're celebrating the anniversary of creation there. And then on the 10th day, you have a day of fasting, it tells us about. Sacrifices are brought. We call them the High Holy Days because actually it starts about 30 days before is the 1st of Elul. And it's a 40-day period total. And the 1st of Elul is actually a new year for the birthing of animals. We have 4 New Years in Jewish time. It's the 1st of Nisan, which is when Passover falls during this month of Nisan. That's the first day, that's the beginning of the first month. And it's on we read, again, you can check this out in the Bible, I promise it's there, that on the 15th day of the first month is when Passover falls. So it was a little bit of a trick question, because the High Holy Days, we often think about Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. This season also is a type of High Holy Day because of Passover. In Jewish life, if someone asks a Jewish question and you don't know the answer, 75% of the time, just say the Exodus and you're going to be right. Like that is you just came through Easter. I know about these things. Yes, I know I'm a rabbi, but I've heard about Easter. I took a New Testament class, a couple of New Testament classes when I was in rabbinical school, because as they said, look, you need to know who your neighbors are. And so if you were to say what is the central or governing foundational story of Christianity, it's the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Like and that's okay for me to say this, I assume, on this altar. People in the synagogue, if I say the word Jesus, can I say that? Is that all right to say Jesus? So that's Christianity's central story, the birth, the death, the resurrection of Jesus. That's what you just celebrated with Easter. For us, our central story is having been slaves in Egypt, being brought to freedom, marching off to Sinai, and receiving the Torah. That's our central story. And then, of course, then there's going to be 40 years of journeying after that. So this time period is remarkably important for us. And biblically, we have Passover starts. It's 7 days. Some observe an 8th day. I'm not going to get that into the detail right now, but boy, that's Jewish law on steroids. So it's 7 days. And we're told that on the day after the Shabbat, this is in Leviticus, on the day after the Shabbat of the first day of Passover, you shall begin counting each day a measure of grain. It's called the Omer, for 7 weeks. And at the end of the 7 weeks, you will have a holiday that is known as very creative name, the Festival of Weeks. Well, I just really knocked it out with that one. And you're celebrating the 7 weeks that you just came through. Now, we love the number 7 in Jewish life. It's creation, it's wholeness, it's all that. So you go 7 weeks, and on the 50th day, you have this holiday celebrating the weeks, and it is the festival of the first fruits. So we're all focused on spring holidays. It's all about the agriculture. That is Passover. We got wheat harvest happening. The first fruits are coming in line. And at the end of the 7 weeks, you're bringing a basket of your fresh fruits, the first fruits, up to the temple in Jerusalem. And you make this proclamation that we actually just read at our Seder. My father was a wandering Aramean. We went down to Egypt in meager numbers, and there we grew large and big, and then we were enslaved, and God brought us out. And you present the basket. Okay, so what's that about? We always remember, history, memory is central in Jewish life. We have the ability to forgive, we do not forget. And so we bring that. So this time period is really, really central biblically, and certainly for us to this day. And there's a ritual called the counting the Omer. Every night you count the Omer. Our days start when the sun goes down, because that's what it says in creation. There was evening, there was morning. Okay. So that's the time period biblically. But I'm going to take you into a concept that is a modern High Holy Days, or expression of the High Holy Days in the modern era, namely since the creation of the state of Israel. And that's, of course, that's in May of 1948. We're about to come upon 3 days that are called in Hebrew the Yamim. Yom is day, Yamim is days. In the fall, we have the Yamim Noraim, the awesome days or the days of awe. That's Rosh Hashanah to Yom Kippur. These are called the Yamim, the days. Why are they so important and why is it about to happen? So next Wednesday, exactly a week from tonight, we will be at synagogue and we will have a service that is going to start with an air raid siren. Why an air raid siren? Because if you're in Israel, on the night of what's called Yom HaShoah v'Hagvura, the day to remember the Holocaust and the resistance, what happens, and everybody knows it's about to happen. First of all, and it happens at 8 o'clock at night, before you get to 8 o'clock, the restaurants close, bars close, everything closes. TV stations, unless they're doing programming for the next 24 hours related to Holocaust-related matters or the resistance, they will go dark, and they will simply put a memorial candle on the station. Unless it's a station that comes from abroad, but all the Israeli stations, the radio stations as well, all the music, all the programming turns to remembering the Holocaust. And at 8 o'clock, an air raid siren sounds throughout the country. Buses stop, people who are driving stops, it's publicized over the radio, you hear their air raid sirens all over Israel, you hear it. Everyone just stops for 2 minutes. I've been there, it is a chilling and unbelievable experience to see everything just stop. Imagine you're on Stratford Road and you just stop. And people get out of their car, finishes, and then you drive on. A lot of people will go to a ceremony that night that'll be done maybe in their synagogue, maybe in a community center, and there's speakers, there's music, there's programming related to the Holocaust and remembering it. The same thing's going to happen the next day in the morning, and it's going to happen at 10 o'clock in the morning. And schools, some places of work will have a ceremony that they'll do. So the siren goes off at 10, and then there'll be a ceremony that people will do. It's a quiet day, it's a work day, it's a day in school, but it is a very quiet day around the country. And then when Yom HaShoah ends, which is sunset, then that's the end, and we carry on. It was said on that day, in the Hebrew calendar, it's the 27th day of Nisan, because it's to commemorate when there was the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising. And the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was in 1943, and it's the Nazis had surrounded the Warsaw Ghetto, and they were going to simply, a lot of people had already been killed and taken out to Auschwitz. And there was a group led by an individual, his name was Mordechai Anilevich, and he said, we're going to fight the Nazis. We have meager means. We are going to fight and hold them off as long as we can. I'm embarrassed, I don't remember how long. It was not long, but it was a solid 2 or 3 weeks, if I remember correctly. And of course, ultimately the ghetto was liquidated. But they fought, and that heroism is why when in the modern state of Israel, when they were deciding how do we mark the Shoah, how do we create a memorial for it? And there were many in particularly observant circles who said, what do you mean? We have a day to remember the tragedies that happened nationally to our people. It's called Tisha B'Av. Tisha B'Av is the 9th day of Av. It falls in the summertime, and it was on the 9th day of Av. If we just scroll a little bit past what Isaiah is in chapter 20 is talking about here, when the first temple gets destroyed. The first temple is destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, who had invaded into Israel, into Jerusalem. He destroyed the temple, and in 586 BCE, he destroys the temple, and he drives the Jews into exile, into Babylonia. And that's why we have Psalm 137, by the rivers of Babylon. There we sat down and wept when we remembered Zion. If I forget thee, O Jerusalem, let my right hand wither, let my tongue cleave to the roof of my mouth. And so that day is a very dark day, but the Persians took over the Babylonians and let the Jews back. And we got to go back to Jerusalem. We rebuilt the temple. The Romans, who did what they did with Jesus, roughly in the year 30, about 35 years later, the Jews create a revolt against Rome, because they don't like the sovereignty of the Roman, how the Romans handle them. They fight for 4 years, from 66 to 70, and the Romans destroy the second temple. Of all the days on the calendar they should pick, they picked Tisha B'Av, the 9th day of Av, because they knew it was a good day for the Babylonians. Why shouldn't it be good for them as well? So Tisha B'Av becomes a very important day in Jewish life. It's a very dark day. It's the only other day other than Yom Kippur that's a full fast day for us. We have some half fasts. It's a full fast day. And assorted other tragedies happen to us because, people find out about a good thing. And so when Queen Isabella decided to expel the Jews from Spain as part of the Inquisition in 1492, she chooses the 9th day of Av. And there are various other things that have happened to us on that day. So there were many religious Jews who said, we don't need to add to the calendar, we should remember the Shoah on Tisha B'Av. It was a national horror that happened to our people. Others came along and said, look, but the magnitude of this is part of the modern experience, and 6 million of our people, and so many of the people who literally were living in Israel at that time, were themselves survivors or refugees or certainly lost family members there. And they said, we need a day. And the day they set was the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, because it showed and it reminded that there was resistance at will. We did not go, as some have spoken, about this idea as sheep to the slaughter. And there were those who fought back. Interestingly, the United Nations in 2008 or so, they set a day for the International Holocaust Memorial Day. And it was actually from a resolution from Israel. And despite the fact that the majority of resolutions passed by the United Nations are against Israel, this one was to remember the Holocaust. But the day that they chose was when Auschwitz was liberated. Now, in Jewish circles, we tend not to mark that day as the day to remember the Holocaust. Well, I might say prayers during the service. I'll say something about it or an offering, but not like we do Yom HaShoah. Why? Because the liberation of Auschwitz came about as a result of somebody else helping us. And if we want to see ourselves as victims, then we would mark that only. But we see ourselves, yes, we have been victims, but we also see ourselves as agents in building a better world for ourselves, please God, for others as well. So too, it was the Red Army that liberated the Jews from Auschwitz in 1945. It was that same government in the Soviet Union that made life rather miserable for Jews as well, certainly during Soviet-era times. So we have Yom HaShoah is coming in just a week. It's already on our minds. And the kind of the mood, if you're in Israel, Passover is a lot of fun, and people have the week off of work, and you're visiting family, but you know Yom HaShoah is coming. And so as soon as you come out of Passover, which will be in a couple of days, mentally you're just getting ready for what's going to be a very long week, which I'll tell you in a second. So we have Yom HaShoah, be next Wednesday night into Thursday. And then, and by the way, the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising was tied with Passover, because the Jews said, that was a moment of liberation, let's make this ours as well. And so when they set it on the calendar, they basically found the closest date that could work after Passover ends, because they didn't want it during Passover. It wouldn't be right to do that. 1 week later, Israel's going to have its Yom HaZikaron, its Memorial Day. And so there's not a family in Israel, there's not a person in Israel who's not touched somehow by somebody who died either in a terror attack or certainly fighting for the country. Everyone in Israel, other than the ultra-Orthodox, serves in the military. Men and women, they go in at 18. Women serve for 2 years, men serve for 3. Some people choose to stay on for career. And so Yom HaZikaron is a very somber day. Again, restaurants close, radio programs, TV programs go to memorial settings. 1 year I was in Israel, and it was Yom HaZikaron, and I was standing on a street corner in Jerusalem and ready for the siren, as were other people, and we were just kind of standing around, and the siren starts, and it's very quiet, other than the siren, and I see these 2 people walking across the intersection, and I'm like, wait, why are they walking? Who are they to walk? And then I realized, Palestinians. There's another people who live there and who are very challenged what Yom HaZikaron means. And it was a stark reminder of the reality of what it is to be in Israel. It's not only Jews who live there. The story of Arab Israel, and for Arab Israelis are very conflicted on that day as well. Palestinians live in the West Bank or in Gaza. Arab Israelis are citizens of the country and live within Israel itself. And so it can be often a very difficult day as well. So Yom HaZikaron, that's going to run. And there's, again, the siren in the evening, siren in the morning. People stop. There's a lot of ceremonies that go on in schools and various villages and different towns. When it ends, the country goes from this heaviness and somberness to just elation, because it's Independence Day and it's Yom HaAtzmaut. And the concept is you cannot celebrate the foundation of the state without remembering first. It would be as if we had our Memorial Day, and the next day, right? So like whatever the Monday is in May, and July 4th up against each other. First you remember, then you celebrate. And so everybody, in Independence Day, restaurants are open, it's part, like, the streets can be blocked, there's parties, nobody works on the next day, schools are closed, like, it is a very celebratory day. Again, for many Arab Israelis, or for Palestinians, they'll call it something else. They use the term Nakba, which is Arabic for catastrophe, because that's what it means to them. It's a very complicated reality, because you have two people in the same land that both call it their own, and yet also Israeli Arabs they're Israeli, and very much feel it. And so, not universally always in the same way, but it's a conflicted and yet very good time, although it depends on whose side you're on, so to speak. So this is where we are in the Jewish calendar. We're going to be finishing Passover soon. We're counting the Omer. We're getting ready for this rather intense emotional time. It's one thing for us as American Jews. In Israel, it's a whole nother level. And then we'll come at the end of the 7 weeks. We'll come to Shavuot, which means weeks. It's the festival of weeks. It's the festival of the first fruits after the destruction of the temples. The rabbis reinterpret some of the holidays, and this one comes to be known as the time when Torah was given to us at Sinai. And so we celebrate, some people might call it Pentecost in English. And so it's when we were given the Torah. And so we will stay up, we'll study, we'll do all kinds of things on that night. Dairy treats are often consumed because, there's various reasons from the Song of Songs when it talks about milk and honey on your tongue, and so there's a sweetness to learning, we always say. Also, in terms of the kosher laws, it's easier to do a dairy meal than a meat meal, and so somehow the Israelites knew there were going to be kosher laws handed down, and therefore we should have a dairy meal. This is just, as we say in Yiddish, it's stuyus. It's its own kind of craziness that we do. So that's where we are in the Jewish calendar, and so I thought it wouldn't work perfectly with, like, what have I learned over 21 years, and yet this is my role, is I'm a Jew, I'm a very proud Jew, and I'm learning along with my congregation, and so it's what I'm teaching, and it was very kind what you said, Rana, and I very much feel that I'm learning alongside, but I also recognize that as a rabbi I'm directing, and I want to get others along. When I went to rabbinical school and I was in my first year and learning all this stuff, and I'm like, why do you have to go to rabbinical school to learn this? Like, this is just being a Jew. And so it's long been my goal to say, how do we live this rich tradition and heritage of ours? So that's what I got. And it is just 7:35 about. So how are we doing? All right.
Let's see.
Open it up to some questions?
Yes.
All right.
Let's see what anybody would
Y'all,
like to ask.
everyone stayed awake, which was really impressive, because I know had a nice dinner, and it was really nice of you. I'm sure I would have been able to do that.
So who would like to ask a question about something he's shared or
something else?
So would it be easier to do, it seems to me it would be easier to be a Jew in Israel, where everybody, a majority of people are doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Rather than here where you're this little tiny community trying to fit what you need to do around the secular world.
So the question was, it would seem,
They're trying to do the same thing sometimes as Christians.
right.
It's probably harder.
Right, the question is it easier to be a Jew in Israel or in the diaspora? That's the question. Is it easier to be a Jew in Israel or in the diaspora, meaning not in Israel? In Jewish world, we often think of kind of like absolutes. It's light or it's dark. You're a Jew or you're a non-Jew. There's Israel and there's the rest of the world. Israel, this tiny little country, and like there's Israel, and then there's literally we refer to Israel or Chul. Chul is an abbreviation for Chutz La'aretz, outside of the land. So I would say there are different components. Of course, it's very easy to be Jewish in Israel because the entire calendar. Thursday night is a great night. People go out, relax. You're getting ready for Shabbat, for the Sabbath, because the Sabbath begins on Friday evening. So Friday, there's not school, there's not work. So everyone's just kind of hanging out, getting ready for Shabbat. Now, interestingly, Israel started to change its calendar a little bit to be a bit more Western, but Shabbat's super easy to do in Israel. Passover, when you go down the supermarket aisles that have things that you can't eat during Passover, there are huge canvas cloths over them. You can't even touch it, like it's just not even available to do. Of course, some people then find their way to Arab villages and buy pita. So there's there's that. Of course it's easier in Israel. And that being said, diaspora life, certainly, Jews in America, we've had a greater experience of welcoming here than, dare I say, anywhere else in the world, period. There were great years of Jewish flourishing in Spain in kind of the 9th, 10th centuries, 11th century, under Arab Muslim rule, interestingly. I mean, we often think that Jews and Muslims, we're so different. Actually, and this may be a little tough to say in a church, but Jews and Muslims, we get along better than we do with Christians because we come from the same place. And although we have a rough history at certain times, our history is shared. People get confused because they see the modern conflict between Israelis and Palestinians and think, oh, the Jews and the Muslims don't like each other. That's a political issue. That is a political issue. Jews and Muslims, we share a lot. Some of the eating customs, although they interpret it differently or we do, the Middle Eastern reality. If you go to Israel, I present very European, sure, because the majority of Jews in North America come from Central and Eastern Europe. Not all, but most are white Ashkenazi Jews. You go to Israel, they're everything from Ethiopia, black, to from Yemen, Iraq, Syria. If you think about Baghdad, before Israel became a state, Baghdad was a third Jewish. I mean, Jews were no longer welcome in Arab countries after Israel became a state. And there were 850 to 1 million Jewish refugees from Arab countries between about 1948 to 55. So Jews in Israel look a whole lot more like the Middle East than they do like me. It's just under 50% that are Ashkenazi. So it's just easier. But there's such a rich tradition here. There's so much that I get to do, and I don't listen. A lot of those who observe Judaism in Israel are from a more Orthodox tradition. That doesn't jive so well, and some of the law of the land is driven by Orthodoxy. That's not going to jive so well necessarily with that reform. Yeah. Question.
Mark, in your time in Winston-Salem, what's one of the things you learned that you'll take to Massachusetts?
So in my time here, what's one of the things that I've learned that I'll take with me to Massachusetts? So I have colleagues in different cities, obviously, and we chat on a regular basis. There is an interfaith connection and desire among people in this town that is really very special. And it's whether it's Christians, Jews, Muslims, blacks, whites, that really is, I think, a very healthy thing. It's not perfect, it's not universal, but I think I think Winston-Salem is a very special place. And I think that there is an openness for people to work with one another. Now, again, I don't want to paint this as somehow this idyllic land, but there is something about the fact that it's named Shalom, okay, Salem, peace. It drives a little of the energy in the space, and I just think it really, it's a unique place that way. And it is some of the partnerships that go on, the creativity that happens. My son went to UNCSA for high school. He studied there, and I knew about UNCSA before he went, but once he was a student there, I'm like, oh my God, this is unbelievable what goes on. And we have various kids from Temple who have gone there. It's a really special place, and I think some of the creativity in this town is very special, and I will hold that. Yeah. Other questions? Rick?
Those two don't mix, so I'm just interested in your...
How do we deal with that? So Rick asked a question, what's the tension like spiritually between not forgetting and not forgiving? And that if we look at something as enormous as the Holocaust, yes, we should never forget. And actually, the idea of not forgetting is a commandment that comes in the book of Deuteronomy. In chapter 25, at the end, it talks about Amalek, the evil of Amalek. Amalek is this king and his people who attacked the Israelites as they're on their way up out of Egypt, and he attacks from the rear, so he attacks the most fragile and the elderly. And so he becomes the epitome of evil, and we should never forget. It says, remember, or actually, it's not the command voice. It's more like an adjective. Be in the state of remembering the evil of Amalek, and in the end of the paragraph, it says, don't forget. So really emphasize this idea, and there's a little bit more to it than that. But and so we can't forget. So how to forgive if you're so entrenched in not forgetting? Because if you really drill down into that, so I want to think of two sources that I would turn to. One is Simon Wiesenthal, who himself is a survivor and an incredible writer in his lifetime and of blessed memory. And he wrote a book called The Sunflower. And it's this story of, if I'm remembering correctly, it's a number of years since I read it, that there's a Jewish patient, or there's a Nazi patient who is dying, and he wants to call a Jew into the room to seek forgiveness. Can this Jew forgive this Nazi for the atrocities that this person has done? And it's the essays that follow in that book as well that are really important from various theologians. I can't forgive you for something that you didn't do to me. How can I forgive you for something that I wasn't there? And literally, who am I to forgive a person who did something that I wasn't there? You didn't do it to me. And yet, that sense of peoplehood says, but you did do it to me. You affected my entire people. And it was not only in the 20th century, in the Nazi German experience, that we knew from these kind of horrors. I mean, there's a reason why my ancestors and Rana's and others came to this country or went to South America, wherever they could get out of, because the anti-Semitism made life untenable. It was no longer possible. So on the one hand, how can I even forgive? It's not up to me to do the forgiving. And yet, if I don't accept a person who has a contrite heart, a genuine contrite heart, who is coming forward to saying, I want to make the world a better place, I did wrong. Who am I to say no to that as well? The rabbis teach us that if you go to somebody 3 times, like as you're getting ready for Yom Kippur, I'm sorry, I did this wrong. How can I fix? Tshuva, repentance is about 3 steps: acknowledge, repair, and change your behavior. So the change of behavior means you're always in the process of it. You're never done, really. So if someone's acknowledging and they're fixing, trying to repair as best they can, and they are changing their behavior, it's actually on you to accept that forgiveness. If after 3 times you say, no, I can't do it, and the person genuinely tries 3 times, now it's on you. That person's good to go. And if somebody dies, again, this is the rabbinic mind at work. What if somebody dies and you needed to say, I'm sorry, I'm trying to repair, I'm changing my ways? You go to the person's grave and you bring witnesses with you. And you do it 3 times in front of these people, because presumably that person would have had to have accepted by that point. So we don't forget, but yes, we do at a certain point need to forgive. And then the other source I'm going to give you is one of our dear congregants. Some of you may know or have met Margot Lobrie. Margot Lobrie is, I want to say, about 96, 95. And she, God bless her as well. Margot Lobrie was born in Frankfurt, Germany. And in 1930, I want to say, Kristallnacht, the night of broken glass, was in November of 38. And starting with that time, or soon thereafter, came what was known as the Kindertransport, which actually there's a display of it right now over at Forsyth Tech about it. The Kindertransport got 10,000 Jewish, mainly Jewish, not exclusively, but mainly Jewish kids out of Germany, and a deal was struck with England, and they could have sponsors in England. So Margaret was 13 years old. She literally said goodbye to her mother at the train station in Frankfurt and would never see her again. Her mother died during the war. Her brother, who was 16, I think at the time, he moved to Israel, and he went to was British Mandate Palestine at the time, and lived his life out there, and only died a couple of years ago. She teaches about her story and the nature of what happened repeatedly. She lived in London. She was in England for about 3 years, I want to say, and then came to this country, I think, in 1944, that she came to the States. She says, you can't carry anger. You can't be angry, because it will ruin your life. It will, if all you do is harbor that anger, and here's this, and now Margot's 96, and she tells this little woman is just so loving and kind and sharp, and she's literally been there. And for her to say, you can't harbor anger, or it will ruin you. And that's exactly right. And that's why I think the rabbi set a really important model for us of, yes, on the one hand, I can't forgive, but spiritually, I have to accept what was done. And I think that for us as Jews, we don't always live up to this perfectly. But I think the essence is we don't see ourselves as victims. And we shouldn't forget, because shame on you if you do. But that being said, I'm going to move on. And because if we don't, it's a spiritual death, we could say. Sure.
One of the best things you could possibly say is you can't harbor anger.
That's exactly it.
It's going to kill you.
Yeah, it's true. It's true.
Capital letters, thank you to both of you. Capital letters, really. Rana, you have to promise to stay with us here at Salem Town because we have no choice but to let this guy Mark go to Massachusetts. If he likes Massachusetts, okay. That's where the wife is, that's good. Really, every time we get to do things with you all, it's just so special. It is really so special. Both ways, you see.
I've got one more question. You've been involved here 20 plus years. You talk about relationship, community, and you've really been involved in the community. What's your parting challenge to the church as you leave?
Want to take that one? The question was, I believe in relationships, and what are my parting words as kind of a challenge to the church? Do you mean to a home Moravian or like?
Church in general, but also the Moravian.
Good luck. My parting words are don't let go of each other. Don't let go of each other, either within home Moravian or to reaching your hands out to other people. Do you know when there was the terrible march and the hatred that came out of Charlottesville in 2017? Some of your folks may have been there as well, but I know the people from Highland Presbyterian, which is our next door neighbor, they came out to welcome us for Shabbat, for our Friday night services. And some of them had signs they had made. The best one that I liked was, hate is not kosher. Right? Like, I mean, and someone wrote us Shabbat Shalom, which is our greeting that we say, Sabbath of peace. It was just lovely. And I think that's the connection. Like, and accept that, okay, so this one, listen, obviously, I didn't celebrate Easter for a reason. You didn't celebrate Passover for a reason. Theologically, we are in totally different worlds. Okay. Like, doesn't that make the world more interesting? That you read the text one way and I read the text another way? And I guess that someone said there's this great joke that if Jesus shows up, that there'll be a press conference, undoubtedly. And the first question out of the gate will be, have you been here before? So I just think, respect each other. Now there are, it's not like, oh, anything goes, whatever you believe, have a great time. No, because some beliefs and actions are conflicting and destructive. We're not going to go that far. But respect one another, hold on to each other, value the centrality of community, and whatever your heritage is. whatever your faith tradition is, live into it as best as you can, and your teachers or other people around you would inspire you to do. I always say, it doesn't matter if I'm your rabbi, everyone should just have a rabbi. By the way, when they came out with that thing in 2015, Newsweek has done things like that as well, about the most inspiring rabbis or the most whatever. And to me, they're great rabbis who are listed, and I was quite shocked that I would show up in the newspaper with this. And to me, you should just have a rabbi. You should have someone, or more than one, a teacher who really is your kind of, for a general term, a spiritual director. Someone who really, right? Interestingly, a little side note, as Amy, my wife, and I were starting to get to know each other, we had met in the summer in 2017 in Israel. We were on a study session, and we're chatting. A few months go by, and we're talking, and she said something about being, and she was in the Forward in 2015. I'm like, wait a second, you were in the Forward in 2015? You mean that Inspiring Rabbis thing? And she goes, yeah. I'm like, I was in the 2015. So we opened it up, because of course I still have a copy of it. And there she is, and there I am. Like, it's really funny. Yeah. So, thank you.
I guess from the interfaith love that I have, your question, I kind of picture helping to create bridges between faiths, and so the challenge might be stay on the bridge. Just stay on the bridge so that there's always a way that you can make, more progress towards each other. And so again, we just thank you so much. Now, since Rana's going to stay in town, we're going to write down a date next year that you're coming back and talk to us again. So. Oh, that's true. We do need to get to know. That's okay. Will he be as much fun? Okay. All right.
I wanted to thank you as a person as well as representative of the Jewish faith to the majority of us.
Thank you.
Really, my husband died of Agent Orange in 2010, and eventually I was looking around, different energies in the community to be part of, check out, whatever. And I came to really appreciate the environmental issues that were being discussed at the Jewish Temple. I appreciate not only the rhetoric itself and how it was done, offense, whatever, but the welcome of the Jewish people to me, total outside, coming into temple. And at those first ones that I recall, there was food out there and drinks or whatever, and it was very receiving. We didn't pay anything to come, we didn't bring deviled eggs or anything like that, but it was just there for us to be, as I would see it now, in community. And that has continued to be such a wonderful base for people to come to that series that continues now. The people haven't been very active recently, but I've so much appreciated the experience as well as the subject. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to be the first one in line to hug these two friends right here, and then you all can get right behind me if you want to, and we'll say that ends the evening. Thank you.